On the program, we're talking about some of the main categories that the average retiree spends their money on. Interestingly enough, about 75% of the average expenses that a retiree in America spends their money on can be broken down into four categories. So obviously, if it's 75%, that's certainly the bulk of what you're spending money on. What are those categories? And more importantly, what are some of the strategies that you can use to help reduce down the expense or the cost of those expense items? Prior to the break, we talked about housing. Obviously, that's number one, and some of the strategies to help reduce down the expenses associated there. Number two is sort of this transportation component, which is car and insurance and gas and things like that. Obviously, if you've got cash and cash savings to be able to purchase a car for cash, then that eliminates the cost and the monthly cost of a car loan. Similarly, another suggestion would be to shop around for insurance. I think oftentimes there's a tendency for consumers to stay with the same insurance company for a long time, much like they stay with the same bank for a long time. But you'll find if you shop around, you may actually wind up getting a little bit better cost of insurance by doing that. And then thirdly, if you want to save on your transportation costs, well, then don't rotate a new car into the driveway every 3 years, right? I mean, new cars, they're nice, they're shiny, and you can keep up with the Joneses when you are ultimately getting a car that often. But the reality is that there's a big cost associated with that. So pull back on getting that new car every 3 years, and you'll find that you will be in better shape and have lower expenses as it relates to transportation. So we've got the other two categories to talk about in terms of what the average retiree spends their money on and some strategies that you can follow to help improve your situation in retirement. But we, of course, want to welcome the audience into the program. This, of course, is Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. One of Central Florida's longest-running radio programs, also a top 25 financial planning podcast on the World Wide Web. My name, of course, is Joel Garris. I'm a certified financial planner and certified financial fiduciary at Nelson Financial Planning, where we got a team of great people who also happen to be certified financial fiduciaries who stand ready this week to help you improve your life with a successful and cost-effective financial plan. So give us a call at the office this week to see how they can help you. So next category of those expenses, as you might well imagine, is healthcare. And this one I suspect is going to become the second largest here in the next few years because, as we all know, cost of healthcare really increasing at a pretty good clip, probably going to overtake that transportation as the second largest expense item that retirees use on a regular basis when they're in retirement. But at the end of the day, healthcare spending makes up about $7,000 of annual spending for retirees. Things like preventable care, screening, vaccinations. Obviously, when it comes to healthcare, right, there's some things that you can do to help maybe keep that cost down, right? You have to take care of yourself would be chief among them, right? Make sure you're exercising. Make sure you're walking. A lot of people talk about walking. I still prefer to run, but obviously sometimes you're not able to do that as time goes by. So the value of a good walk is one of the biggest things from a health perspective that has a lot of benefits to it. And then, take the meds, right? If the doctor says take the meds, take the meds. It's supposed to be on blood pressure medicine, take it. I take mine every day, and that helps to keep everything in better control, keeps me healthier along the way. So make sure you're taking your meds. Might be a good way, those two strategies, going for a walk, taking the meds, good strategies to help reduce down what could be potentially the expenses associated with your healthcare needs in retirement. And then lastly, we all got to eat, right? So the fourth biggest category that retirees spend their money on is, of course, food. unfortunately, food is probably the biggest area of inflation that we've seen over the course of the past few months. The notion of going to the grocery store, eating out, things like that is probably an area where we've seen the biggest increase in cost, the biggest impact of inflation. Strategies there include some just general common sense strategies when it comes to try and reduce down how much you are spending, right? First and foremost, budget is always a good idea to keep track of your expenses. By keeping track of them, oftentimes you'll find that, hey, there's ways that I can perhaps use my money better than what I am doing it. Those daily trips to Starbucks do kind of add up when you stop and think about it. But other strategies involve things like meal planning, so that way you don't throw it away. The amount of waste at the grocery store is just tremendous. It seems like every week I'm throwing stuff away at our house, and that's just a waste of money. If you kind of do some meal planning, then you can try and reduce that. Similarly, when you shop, make sure you take a grocery list, get only what's on the list, make sure you pick up those items that are on sale. And what's the other traditional one that people talk about? Don't go grocery shopping on an empty stomach, because you're going to wind up with a much fuller cart than what you expect. With the three boys home this summer, my young adults, I have noticed that the food bill has gone up quite a bit across the board. So certainly an area where folks spend a lot of money, but those are some of the strategies in which to try and improve those expenses. So to recap, average retiree spends about $4,000, about almost $4,400 a month on these four categories of expenses. That's housing, transportation, healthcare, and food. Hopefully, you're able to incorporate some of those strategies we've talked about in this segment, in the prior segment, in terms of reducing down some of those related expenses on these big cost items. So certainly some things to think about as it relates to expenses, particularly in retirement, and how to improve them. So we're going to shift some gears and talk about some of the sobering news that we have seen out there in some of the studies. And this has really sort of been an ongoing trend over the course of the past probably few years, maybe even a couple of decades, where we continue to see the retirement readiness that Americans have is going in the wrong direction. And so when you think about financial confidence for retirement, that recently took perhaps the steepest drop since 2008, according to a recent survey by the Employee Benefit Research Institute. So as a result of all that has been going on, we've seen the steepest drop in sort of financial confidence for retirement, the biggest drop since 2008, which of course was the heart of the financial crisis. So there's a lot of things to sort of unpack in terms of some of the root causes behind that, and sort of what you can do to help address that, because the numbers are certainly relatively rough in terms of the some of the survey numbers. So the average American, and we'll just kind of give you some of the highlights on some of these reports and studies that have come out of late. The average American will only have about 78% of the income they'll need in retirement, according to, this is a study from Fidelity. The same study from Fidelity found that adults were less prepared for retirement now than they were just 3 years ago. That average American only being on track to have about 78% of their income that they'll need in retirement. Actually, a relatively big drop from just where those numbers were back in January of 2020. So about 3 years ago, that number, that 78% number, was actually up to 83%. Obviously, over the past 3 years, there's been a number of things that have happened, right? We've got the COVID pandemic, a bear market based upon the market decline in last year, 2022, and then, of course, record inflation. So those are kind of the three things that are lurking in the background. So some of that decline in retirement readiness can sort of make sense, I guess. But more importantly, rather than just kind of having it make sense, we want to talk on the program today about some of the strategies that you can use to help address some of this stuff that has been happening out there. Because according to the survey from Fidelity, there's actually sort of two primary factors as to why that retirement readiness has declined. And so we want to get into what those factors are and how you can kind of work through those particular factors to improve your retirement readiness. So we're going to take a break. When we get back, we're going to continue this conversation about retirement readiness and some of the things that you can do to help improve your situation. Coming up next here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning.